Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders at Vermont Hills United Methodist Church in Portland, Oregon. I get asked on a fairly regular basis how conversational church or interactive church that we do, how it is going post-pandemic, and especially with hybrid being integrated into our gatherings now. And so I thought I'd make a quick little video and tell you how it's going and why hybrid is providing a really good opportunity, even though it's a challenge, that it's providing a really good opportunity for us. So is that there are 3 kinds of tables and 4 kinds of conversations. So whatever is gonna be the conversation style that we're gonna use that month, we like to set up the space in a way that reflects that. So we actually use our furniture to frame our gathering together. I'll give you a couple for instances. Right now we're in a series where people are coming to this tall top table, and that is the first part of the sermon, is they come to this table and they talk to me about something that's on their heart. And so we've signed up for the next 2 months people who are coming to talk about either one of the 7 deadly sins or one of the fruit of the Spirit. And then after we have that conversation, then I come out here to this little podium and I do a homily, a short sermon on whatever the other one is. So if they pick a fruit of the Spirit, then I talk about the 7 deadly sin. If they pick one of the sins, then I talk about the fruit of the Spirit. And so that is centering in our gathering. So that's one kind of conversation and one kind of table. On the first Sunday of the month, we always rearrange the space because it is Communion Sunday. So what we do is we bring out this communion table, which sits up here on this, like this is a 1-step platform. But on non-communion weeks, the communion table goes back here by this stained glass window. But on Communion Sunday, which is usually the first Sunday of the month, it actually comes out here and goes in the center of this space. So all of the chairs are arranged sort of in a circle, like a horseshoe sort of shape. And so we center the communion table. And that way when we gather, the thing that's most important is centered in the space. So that's the first Sunday of the month when we celebrate communion. And then after the service, the communion table goes back up here. This is where it sits the other 3 weeks of the month. And on weeks that we're not doing this conversation table, it goes over in that corner. And that way, whatever is going to be most important that week is at the center of the space. So I said there were 3 kinds of tables, 4 kinds of conversations. So there's the tall top table, so we call that at the table. We have the communion table for communion weeks. And then the 3rd kind of table are our coffee tables. These are the end caps from when we took out the pews originally. I used the end caps of the pews and actually repurposed the hardware to make these coffee tables. And so on weeks when we're gonna have smaller conversations, so not the centered conversation here at the tall top, but smaller conversations out in the congregation, I put 5 chairs around each coffee table, 5 or 6. And that way when we organize the space, so right now it's sort of set up in a mixed arrangement. But when we set up the coffee tables, we put 5 or 6 around each coffee table, and then throughout the space. And then at some point after I present an idea or preach a message, then I'll say, turn to your neighbor and talk about this, and I'll give them a topic. All right. So that has always been how we've done it. That is how the interactive conversational community goes. But now in hybrid, we have a wrinkle. So the fun part is that we have decided that we are going to integrate Zoom into the gathering. And this is important for us because for those who join us online, we want them to be able to speak into the space, and we want them to be able to hear what's going on here so that in the sanctuary and online, that they both have access to participate in the conversation and that their contribution actually gives shape to our gathering and our conversation. So how we have figured out to do this is that we got a new soundboard. It sits back here behind the monastery rail, and it has a USB out, which then runs over here to our PowerPoint computer. And when that goes into the computer, that allows our Zoom crew to hear exactly the same mix as what's happening in the sanctuary. So that our people who are here hear the same thing that people who are online hear. Now, the added wrinkle is that we use the speakers so that those on Zoom can speak into the space as well. So they're not just spectators watching what's happening, they can actually participate in that. The reason this is super important is that some of our liturgists actually liturgize from home. And so when they are doing the part of the liturgy from home, it comes up on these screens. So we have 3 screens around the space, one at the back and one here on the side, and then one here up at the front. And with those 3 projectors, because we sit in this horseshoe shape, no matter where you are in the space, you can see a screen. This is fantastic for our musical worship, so that we're not singing at the back of each other's heads, but that we actually see each other's faces as we worship God together. It's beautiful. But when it comes to either the liturgist being online on some Sundays, or sometimes for this conversation, the person's actually on Zoom. So I will still sit at this table, but I'll have a conversation with them. I'll be looking at a screen, but everyone else will be able to see their face as well. And we just tell the person who's at the PowerPoint computer, to pin them so that they're up on the screen. And so it works pretty well for people in the sanctuary to be able to see what's going on in Zoom and vice versa. So when we break up into those smaller conversations, like around our coffee tables, we will send the Zoom room to their breakout rooms, and then when they come back, we check in with them to see how their conversation went. So the basic model of the 3 tables and the 4 kinds of conversations works great. The hybrid situation of people joining online is also working well and allows people, whether they're traveling or whether they are in isolation for medical reasons or whatever, that they can still participate in the conversation. And it works pretty well with this USB so that they're hearing the same mix as those in the sanctuary. So the last thing that I will say is, so I've talked about the 3 tables, so the communion table, the tall top table, and the coffee tables. And I've talked about 3 of the 4 kinds of conversations. There is a 4th conversation, and it works well with hybrid as well, which is that we have extra, these handheld mics. So they are cordless mics, they're handheld mics, and we have them set up so that the receivers actually run into the back of the sound system. And what we can do is we have mic stands, and we can spread the mic stands around our space so that we put them in these openings. And so that allows people to go to a microphone. So I'll often present an idea. People will then go to a microphone, and they will be able to speak into the space. And I used to call it like bull in the middle, although I don't like the bullfighting imagery, so we're trying to find a new name for it. But I get to say, like what a preacher normally says, but then my time of talking is over and it's time for me to listen. And then we decenter the sermon so that those who are speaking are at around the space, and they speak into the space their unique perspective and contribution. It's the 4th kind of conversation. And the reason it works with hybrid is because of the 3 projectors. Those on Zoom can also speak into the space. And so often I'll present, like, say, a 5-minute idea, and then I'll give people a couple minutes to think about it. And then I'll invite them to go to the microphone. And so they'll go to 1 and 2 and 3, and then I'll check in with the Zoom crew, and it allows people to give feedback in real time as we have an honest, open dialogue, a conversation about whatever the topic is that day. And it's just one of my favorite things in the world. So that is how we're doing it. Conversational community, interactive church, whatever you want to call it, Church 2.0, but in hybrid. So we have 3 projectors, 3 kinds of tables that facilitate 4 kinds of conversation. And that gives us shape not only to our physical space, but also to our worship gatherings. And it gives us a structure each month that we know there's going to be a communion week, there's going to be at least one of these conversations, and there's going to be at least one of the coffee table conversations. And so that gives us enough variety and variables that it doesn't get boring and that there's enough variation that people can participate at the level they're comfortable. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that you will feel free to experiment understanding the setup that we have and the structure and what it allows us to do, because it really is a dynamic and wonderful exchange that moves people from being spectators at a stage show, a spectacle, to actually being participants in a live engagement.